I am. Thanks for coming. And it seems like somehow or another, these speaker series events that we have in September are, I was going to say cursed. That's not the right word, but we have challenges. We've done this, I guess this is the 9th September we've done it. And two out of the nine have had to get canceled because of hurricanes. So, I guess whenever we're doing this in the middle of September, we run a risk. But reality is, you're here, Rachel is here, so we're good to go for tonight. Um, for some of you, I know that I go through this every time, but there are some of you who are here for the first time, and it's important that you understand who this is presented by. It's a combination of four different organizations here on Daniel Island: the Rotary Club, of course, the Rotary Club, the Daniel Island Business Association, the Daniel Island Community Association, and then the Daniel Island Club. And it's nice, I think, that we've got four very different organizations that have somehow or another joined forces to put this together. And again, this has been around almost for 10 years now. I guess maybe I guess the first thing I need to do is talk about a little bit about sort of upcoming speakers, who is next on the list. The next speaker series will be on November 16th. Okay. It's a little closer. This build is being quarterly, but kind of little loose quarters here. But in any event, coming up on November 16th. And this is kind of a special evening for us because that will be the 10th anniversary of our very first speaker series event, which was back in November of 2012. So we wanted to make it a little bit different, a little bit special. And so what we decided to do is to bring back our very first speaker, the guy who spoke at that one back in 2012, and that's Rob Fowler, the chief meteorologist from WCBD. Rob is obviously, he's just a nice man. He and his wife, Cara, are just really, really pleasant people. And he did a great job 10 years ago, and I'm sure he's going to do that as well. He is obviously a very well-known personality here in the Low Country. I think a lot of us, certainly Mary and I, invite him into our homes every evening to watch the news and the weather. So Rob, and he's also become a very good friend of the Rotary Club here. It turns out, for any of you that are familiar with his program, he has what he calls the 3-degree guarantee. So he makes a forecast of what the high temperature is going to be for the next day. And if he's right, then $100 goes into the kitty for the charity of the month. And frequently in May, Rob has sort of named our charity duck race as being the recipient of the money for that. So he is obviously a big supporter of the duck race. We appreciate that, but we also appreciate you. You guys have been what has really made the duck race such a success for us. We've been doing this now since 2007, and you all come out year after year with your sponsorships, your individual contributions, and we love you for that. Thank you so much. What else have I missed? I'm not so sure. Oh, just for curiosity, the island has changed a lot in the last 10 years. How many of you were here on the island or in the vicinity back in 2012 when Rob was first speaking? Wow, there's a lot more here than I thought. You guys are the real regulars. Okay. All right. Next question. How many of you came to that first presentation? Now that's a fair number. Good for you all. Well, you all certainly are regulars. I keep doing the name badges, keep seeing the names pop up again and again. So that's great. And thank you all for coming every single time. So let's move on to the main show. Now we're going to talk about Rachel for just a second here. I've sent you around the little blurb about Rachel, so you kind of know the story. She came to us at one of our little Wednesday weekly meetings for Rotary. She was 16 years old. I guess that's what you are when you're a junior in high school. And she was going to talk about her science project that she had to do with two of her colleagues. She was going to talk about tin whiskers. I dare say I probably was not the only one in the room that didn't have a clue what tin whiskers were or why anybody should care about these things. But Rachel educated all of us. And little did she know that this whole presentation, this little science project, was going to change her life. And don't want to steal her thunder, but basically what it came down to is that she never envisioned herself as being a science type, a STEM type. And now suddenly this thing went well. She got a scholarship to college, and now she is working in Washington and working on space policy, which I'm sure she's going to talk about as well. So, ladies and gentlemen, please, well, before I talk, all of you younger folks, you students that are here, I think Rachel may change your life here today. So listen up. So, ladies and gentlemen, let's give a big warm welcome to Rachel Lindberg.
Everybody, thank you. Wait, do you guys hear me okay? Okay, let's lift it up. Sorry, get situated. How's this? Better at all? How about this? Okay, great. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for coming to see me today. I really appreciate it. It's lovely to see so many friendly faces from Daniel Island, especially from St. Clair. My name is Rachel Lindberg, and I am a science policy analyst. And I work at the Science Technology Policy Institute, which is, can you guys hear me? I can't tell. Okay. Is it? What am I doing wrong here? How's this? Is this too? Okay. Okay. I'll just have this in my face the whole time. Okay. So I'll start over then. My name is Rachel Lindberg, and I'm a science policy advisor to the White House Office of Science Technology Policy through the Science Technology Policy Institute. We are a federally funded research and development center, an FFRDC, sort of like NASA JPL, who y'all might be familiar with. So we are made by Congress to support the White House. So every day I spend my day writing reports and helping organize meetings to help advise executive policy, not just the White House, but for, other offices in the executive office of the president, like the National Space Council, or in general for federal agencies with a science and tech mission. My notes right here. And thank you, Steve, so much for introduction. I wanted to also acknowledge my teammate, Joe Garvey, who was also at that presentation back then. We worked on our tin whisker experiment together back in the day. So I'd like to talk to you guys today about space policy, which is something I would be unsurprised to hear that maybe none of y'all have heard of at all, and maybe are not convinced it's a real thing. And I'm going to prove to you guys today that science policy and space policy is a real thing. So why is space important? I'm sure you guys have, I'm sure you guys maybe know space is up there, that there's International Space Station, but I'm sure in your day-to-day lives, you don't think at all about how space affects you. When you put in an address on your phone, I'm sure you don't think about the satellite constellation, GPS, that is helping you get to brunch on time. And I'm sure when you swipe your card at a restaurant, you don't think about how that transaction goes to a satellite before it goes to your bank. These are all things that, why would you ever think about, because you can't see them. You may also have never considered the all these spin-off technologies that we learned from the space shuttle and the International Space Station. Things like memory foam in your mattress was originally developed for space. Or any of the technologies we use to make cars safer, most of it's from space. So I'm really excited to talk to you guys about that today. And especially one thing that I'm near and dear to my heart is Earth observation. Now that we have thousands and thousands of satellites up and above us right now, looking down on us, there's things we've only been able just now to learn with that unique vantage point. There are things that we're able to see, like climate change, in a totally new way that we had never looked at, or even things as sad as we've been using satellites to track slave trades and human trafficking, something we never could have done in that level of granularity without satellites. So I'm very excited to talk to you guys about space. And I think to kind of illustrate the importance of science policy and space policy, I'm going to highlight 3 different space policy areas and kind of talk about why they're important. And a lot of my life is very formal and in a suit, so I would love for this to be a bit more relaxed. So if at any point you guys don't understand what I'm talking about, I'm going too fast, just raise your hand and we can kind of make it more of a conversational speech. I really would love that. So the first thing I want to talk about is microgravity. You guys may never heard of that. And you probably more likely heard the term zero gravity, the effect of weightlessness. Like if you've ever seen Gravity with Sandra Bullock, right? And George Clooney, right? Where George Clooney flies off into space, never to be heard of him again. That's all about zero gravity. But it's really not the absence of gravity. What it is that the International Space Station is moving so fast, 20,000 miles per hour. It's moving so fast that it's constantly falling. And because of this, you only feel a very small amount of gravity at any given moment. And you might think, so what, right? but gravity is foundational to every single process on Earth. The way that plants grow, the way roots are oriented, the way your bones develop and the thickness of them, the way that your optical nerve connects to your skull, that is all shaped by gravity. And for the first time, about 20, 30 years ago, we have had unparalleled access to space through the International Space Station. I see several of y'all, I think, who, to this office a little hot. I see several of y'all here today that are younger than 23. Thank you so much, Steve. If you are younger than 23, you have never lived for a single moment of your life without having 7 people living and working in space, like in this photo. Isn't that insane? We probably never think about it in your day-to-day life, but there are 7 people from all across the world, not just the US, but from Russia and Israel and Italy, living and working in space. And for the people who have been alive for these 23 years, there will never again be a moment without uninterrupted access to space. So you might think, what are we doing with this space station that costs several $billions and takes a lot of constant effort? We're doing the kind of research that people never could have imagined hundreds of years ago. And I'm going to talk about 3 specific areas that are really exciting. The first being the effect of gravity on cells. So I have a mentor at NASA Ames, which is in Silicon Valley, and she was a very early astrobiologist. And she was one of the first people to conduct these types of experiments. And everyone told her, you know, gravity is way too granular and these cells are way too small. Nothing's going to happen when you send these to space that you won't already be able to see on the ground. So she pushed to get it done anyway. And the cells didn't get the memo because what she saw after sending it to space blew her mind. Everything looks differently. And we've finally been able to exploit this to start growing organs in space, which is incredible, right? When we try to 3D print organs on the ground, and we do this a lot, gravity smushes them. There's a lot more scientific jargon for this, but essentially that's what it does. Gravity pulls these organs down and turns them into these flat amorphous discs. And if you want to 3D print a heart or a brain or muscle, you really don't want your heart to be flat or your brain or anything else. But microgravity allows us to create more well-ordered organs, which is just amazing. And I think we're easily 30 to 40 years away from a space-printed heart to be put into anyone. But it's not just exciting for the long-term possibility of implantation. There's also so much research you can do. We've been trying to move as a society away from animal testing. Not just because of ethics, but because nothing's quite like a human, right? You can try studying things on a mouse, but I don't look like a mouse. I know y'all don't. So it's not really helpful to study things like, especially degenerative diseases through a mouse. But when you can grow organs in space that are actual human organs, you can conduct research you would never have imagined. Another exciting area is crystallography. And I'm going to keep trying to boil this down to be very simple. I know these are all jargon terms that our eyes glaze over. We're way past high school chemistry, right? But crystallography is when you take a compound and you try to grow it in a fluid to kind of understand how it's supposed to look. Again, doesn't sound very exciting, but anytime you try to know how to target a drug, you want to crystallize it. You want to understand what it looks like in order to create a drug. And we have been able to make groundbreaking drugs using space because we're able to create better, larger crystals in space. I don't know if you guys have heard of Keytruda. I don't know if any of you guys, I hope not, but maybe you have family members who may have had cancer and they might have received a Keytruda treatment. That was developed and improved in space, which is just incredible. Something we never could have imagined 100 years ago. Another thing that's very exciting that's much closer to the horizon are retinal implants. We're able to print things in space that are much thinner and more perfect, things we could never have imagined. And I really want to just show you some of the amazing photos from the International Space Station. This goes over your head every hour and 30 minutes at 17,000 miles per hour. Isn't that insane? You can't even think about that. And there's never been a moment of anyone's lives younger than 23 who has not had this up there. And it's the size of a football field. It's pretty robust. And you might be wondering, how does policy tie into this very scientific achievement? And it's all about the allocation of resources, which is not very glamorous. But NASA historically has been in charge of this resource, right? But more and more, we want to have this be commercially owned and operated. If it's just NASA, it's just a very select group of scientists and engineers. But we want to have pharmaceutical engineers. We want to have all sorts of other scientists to have access to this. And there's also the aspect that might be on y'all's minds. The International Space Station is a partnership that we do with Russia. And that could not be done without constant policy interactions. So that's definitely a very important area for science policy. And this is some astronauts doing their stuff, which I think is so cool. Before I move on to the next science policy topic, does anyone have any questions about microgravity? Yeah. Mm-hmm. What a great question. So the question was, how is our partnership with Russia going right now? Which is a great question. I do want to make sure to say that I'm not representing the government right now. These are all my personal thoughts and opinions for this whole presentation. So our partnership with Russia is something we have taken for granted for a while, but science policy and science diplomacy has been such a powerful tool in that we might take for granted. People think of the International Space Station immediately, but we've been partnering with Russia all the way back to the Soyuz program or the Apollo-Soyuz program. Before we had people on the moon, we were working with Russia consistently on space. And I think that the International Space Station has been quite a symbol of that diplomacy and a sign that we have been able to get to a very good place with our partnership with Russia. So seeing that relationship devolve has been foreboding, to say the least. And I will say, so Russia is very much a crumbling power in a lot of ways. They don't have the same engineering technology they used to have. They don't have the same scientists. So without us buoying their program, which we've done by paying for their rockets, we've done by subsidizing their researchers, they're kind of screwed in a way, unless they are to shift their allegiances and partner more with countries like China. So we are going to see not necessarily them retreating, but them realigning to work more with China. But also China has a lot of their own technology. They may not want to have the baggage. And we've seen this. They've been pulling away from Russia. So Russia may find themselves, by pulling back from us, retreating from space, which is something that they care about a lot. They think of themselves as a space superpower. You know, we think of ourselves as winning the space race. They think of themselves as having won the space race. We got to the moon first, but they had the first satellite, the first person in space. They don't think of themselves as having lost. So if they are to retreat from space, this will definitely damage their worldview in a huge way. So I think that's definitely a sad. It's a sad sign of times to come. Any other questions before I move to?
Yeah. I've got a roving mic. So if you ask, why don't you wait for me to get to you?
Oh,
Do
sorry,
you want
Steve.
to hold their questions to the end, Rachel?
I kind of like it to be back and forth.
Would you like it back and forth? That means I'm going to have to keep working. All
Sorry,
right.
Steve. Sorry.
Thank you, Rachel. Is there a limit to how long a human can exist in the microgravity environment of space?
Such a great question, and we're only beginning to scratch the surface of that. You may have heard of Mark Kelly and his brother Scott Kelly. They did a series of experiments with them. They're twins. They're both astronauts. I think they have another brother, and I'm sure he makes them look bad all the time. But Scott Kelly went to space for a year, and we learned a lot of things that were encouraging and a lot of things that were sad. For instance, microgravity does a lot of bad things to your bones and to your muscles. And a lot of that you can overcome with exercise. Those astronauts are working out for about 2 hours of rigorous exercise a day, which is tough. They have a whole treadmill that costs an exorbitant amount of money that they use constantly. And that helps in a lot of ways, but there are some things that you can't really repair. For instance, your ocular nerve, the way it attaches to your skull, that just can't be overcome. So we'll really have to dig into, on an astrobiological level, if we ever want to go to Mars. I don't really see it as being possible on a personal level. It's just really hard. And we haven't even looked at reproduction, right? If you want to colonize Mars, you have to be able to have children there. And cosmic radiation is rough. Like if you're going to be able to reproduce well, that's going to be very, very difficult. Sorry, it's a sad answer. I wish the answer was no problem. It'll be great. I think there's a question over there.
Hold on, Bill. Time out.
Sorry. I feel like I'm making Steve mad.
All right, go for it.
I was going to say the amount of money we spent so far trying to find water in the solar system has been astronomical. So once we find water somewhere, what next?
What next? Well, it kind of gets to the deeper question. We're looking for water, but what we're looking for really is life. We want to see if there's any other life out there. And I think there's some, I can't speak at a deep level to the astrobiology there, but I think there's some really interesting ethical questions. If we find water, another planet, and maybe microbes, do we have the right to dig into it further? I mean, if we just by going there, we'll be introducing new microbes, new cells that may disrupt life on Earth. And you may say, who cares? We want to go there. But what would have happened to us if 2 billion years ago an alien had come down, messed up our stuff? We might not be here. And there's a very serious ethical question there. And there's also a bit of a danger. One of the things that I work on is planetary protection. When my boss asked me, hey, you in charge of planetary protection? I was like, hell yeah, I want to shoot down asteroids. That's planetary defense. Planetary protection is sterilizing spacecraft. So when you come back from the depths of space, you're not bringing back anything gross that can tackle life on Earth. So as much as it's a question of, do we have the right to mess up someone else's planet? What happens if we bring back something that we really do not want on our planet? We've seen what happens just in the past couple of years of having a virus that we were unprepared for. And that was a terrestrial virus we studied at great length. Imagine what happens if you bring home a nasty space microbe that you've never, seen before. So does that answer your question, or did I dodge it entirely? No? What happens if we find it? I think we just continue to study it. It depends on how much we find, right? And there's difference between, water, ice. Like we know there's water on Uranus's moons, right? But it's so cold there that the water is, basically a rock, and you have liquids, like liquid oceans, like methane. So it depends on where and when, which again is dodging your question. I'm sorry, there's not more of is it only on Mars that you were asking about? Well, we know there's water other places. I think Europa is a really exciting candidate for life. You guys have heard of Europa? It's one of Jupiter's moons. It's a very small moon, and it has a nearly synchronous orbit, which sounds boring, but I promise it's not, because there's this ice and there's this liquid ocean of water underneath it. Because it's not synchronous, there's always a little bit of friction, and that friction keeps that water, that liquid ocean, liquid all the time. And because of that heat from that asynchronous orbit, there could be life there. So I think that's a very exciting candidate for life that we'll see in the next couple of years. Any other questions? Or my next topic is...
Oh boy. They're everywhere.
When you talked about looking for water
Mhm.
because you were looking for life, what do you think about all the secret reports that they're showing on TV about the government UFOs that they don't want people to know about?
What do I think about it? Well, I mean, a lot of that stuff's at the very, very much on the high side, like the more classified side. So, and I haven't seen all those reports. I think that's another non-answer. But I think that there's been a lot of things, even at the unclassified level, that we know are extremely difficult to explain. Things that we can't even explain away by saying maybe it's Russia or China. And I think this is my personal opinion and not the government. But the fact that the DoD did not take this opportunity to go, these things we can't identify, that's China, and ask for more money, that shows you they really don't know what they were seeing. That's just my 2 cents. So my next topic is on interference in astronomy, but I want to stop because any more questions. Yeah, hi.
Do we have a percentage of living on Mars?
Do we have a what?
Like a chance of living on Mars?
Well, I think there's a lot of things you have. I'm a researcher, so you want to define your assumptions, right? I think we will be able to send people there. I think it'll be very expensive. I don't think it'll be in the timeline we want, but people will touch foot on Mars. But will they be there to stay? I think we don't really have the government funding to do that, which is sad. But I think that we do have the will to visit. So I think that humans will visit Mars. And if anything, it'll be your generation. People your age now will be astronauts. So, and I think more than ever, you have young students have a chance now to be an astronaut where they didn't used to. I think normally the astronaut academy gets 18,000 applications and 10 people become astronauts. But we're entering an era of commercial astronauts. And we shouldn't only interpret that as you have to be a billionaire to go to space. Because now there's more money in there, more private money. There's also specialized jobs, because every astronaut kind of has the same 4 or 5 skill sets. They're all rocket scientists, they're all engineers. But now that we have other people involved to care about space from different angles, we're going to need biologists. We're going to need chemists. There'll be much more skills needed. So there'll be more ways for people in your generation to evolve other than just being an astrophysicist, which is really cool. Can you tell I've been in DC by how much I've dodged all these questions? Okay, so I'm going to talk a bit about light interference in astronomy, which sounds boring, but bear with me. So this thing that you can see with your naked eye, it is the Starlink satellite constellation. And what Elon Musk is trying to do with this is he's launching about 12,000 satellites trying to provide internet to rural populations. We take for granted living somewhere like here, where we all have really fast, fiber optic internet. But in a lot of places, not just in our state, but places, especially places like Kentucky or Alaska, people don't have internet. If you are a student and do your homework, you might have to drive into town and go to McDonald's parking lot and do your homework from your car. And that's still just in our country, let alone all the much more developing countries. Internet access is a serious problem that Elon Musk is trying to encounter. We've had satellite constellations do internet in the past, but they've kind of suffered by being much more expensive. We've gotten to an era where, since all of our technology is smaller, like your phones, which wasn't possible 30 years ago, that same revolution has happened to satellite technology. So Elon Musk has started to do this, right? And they're lower than ever. And what we didn't know until they launched is how bright they are. If this is how this looks with your naked eye, imagine you have a $5 billion telescope that you just spent 20 years building in the Andes or in Hawaii, and you look up at the night sky and you go, what the heck is that? And it's Elon Musk blocking up all your stuff. And I know, good for him, right? But it's a serious problem because we went from having 5,000 objects in the night sky, or 5,000 satellites last year. He alone is launching 12,000 more satellites. That doesn't even account for things, other companies doing similar things like OneWeb, or Amazon has a Kuiper project. And I want to be clear that internet access is a great thing, and it's going to change the lives of so many people if this can be done affordably. However, science policy is important in balancing different stakeholders because, yes, internet access is important, but what about these astronomers? And yes, maybe taking cool pictures of planets might not seem that important, but one thing that for some of these astronomers, they're able to really calibrate their telescopes and look past this. But the astronomers who can't are those looking for near-Earth objects, or NEOs. And what is a near-Earth object, you may ask? That is an asteroid coming towards us. So you really don't want to be blindsided by that. If something's hurtling towards us, something that killed the dinosaurs, you want to be able to see it. And if you can't see it because, of Elon Musk's satellites, what are you going to do? And it's not just that. There's also, and this is going to sound very hippy-dippy of me, but bear with me, but the sky is part of our shared cultural heritage. We have for millennia been able to look up at the night sky. It's important for a lot of religions, a lot of cultures. So how are we going to balance these things? And I'm not saying take down Starlink. That would be ridiculous. But there is something we have to balance where is 12,000 satellites too many? Is there a certain amount where he could do what he needs to be doing with less? There's some things people try to do working with him where they've been painting the satellites black, which has limited success. But I will say that makes it hot. I think about wearing black in the sun out here. That's with the atmosphere protecting you. Imagine being up there. Or they've also tried to have mirrors on it, but again, the same problem of heat. So science policy is a way not just to go who should win and who should lose, but how do we balance these problems and look at them in a more holistic way? Again, this is your naked eye. Does anyone have any questions about Starlink, which I think is a really cool?
All right, why don't we take you first? There you go. Talk loud.
Hello, Miss Rachel. I'm just wondering, how would painting it black help you see asteroids? Wouldn't there still be something there?
That is a great point. So for the asteroid, that's a really, really great question, actually. Thank you. Well, so there's not just the painting black. There's also a matter of having programs. So you can tell all the astronomers all over the world where that satellite's going to be. So it's a matter of coordination too, but you're right. It would still be blocking it. But it's not just that it would be there. That light is bigger than the actual satellite. Like that light's being emanated out. So it's not just that one pinprick. It's actually much smaller than that pinprick. Does that make sense? That's a great question, though. I really like that. So,
Rachel, one more question.
Yeah, of course.
So I think we all saw the news reports this week of the rocket that was launched to sort of smash into the asteroid, right?
Yeah.
And you're talking about these near Earth objects. And I know that one wasn't on a path to collide with Earth, but I think it's the first attempt, right, at seeing whether we can change the path of an asteroid that might be heading toward Earth. So what do we know about that? Do we know anything?
Yeah, we definitely know some, but we'd always know more. I will say there is an office at NASA devoted to looking for near Earth objects, and they work really hard at it. But one of the things that's difficult across all of space is who is supposed to be in charge in the government. It's very easy with certain things government does, like transportation. There's a Department of Transportation. But NASA, especially, is a research organization. They're not operational. They don't have missiles on hand to shoot at asteroids. But it comes to every single issue, they're just very fragmented. The next thing I was going to talk about was orbital debris. And who should be in charge of anything that's happening in space? NASA is not a regulatory agency, and they're only a research agency. So it's not just near Earth objects, it's everything else happening in space. There's no specific government person in charge of that. There is some coordination at the executive level with DoD and with NASA to try and have plans to put in place to shoot down asteroids, and there is a lot of work on that. One of the best things our country can do moving forward is putting that regulatory power and that operational power in someone's wheelhouse, which sounds super boring. But if there was an agency who was explicitly in charge of NEOs, not just from research, but from taking them down, we'd be in a much safer spot, even if it is a very, very small chance. Hey, Ms. Conway. The Space Force is really, really exciting. And I think sometimes people ask about the Space Force as if it's a meme. I think that Netflix show really doesn't help. But it's actually been a DoD proposal for over 30 years. And really mostly what it does is just been moving existing assets out of other branches into all under one umbrella. I don't know how much they work on NEOs. They're involved, but they're not the one person in charge. Really, it'd be great if on a federal level, we were tasking things out specifically. And that would be a great role for the Space Force. I wish I could say more about what's happening, but sadly, a lot of things aren't happening. When it comes down to it, space is never as high on people's lists as it should be, which I totally understand. There's so many things going on in our country and in our world, but space is still out there whether we look up or not.
Rachel, I mean, I don't want to interrupt your thing. I mean, we're getting lots of questions. We could probably go on here for ages with questions.
Yeah.
Do you want to go through more of this? Do you want to keep asking?
Let's do one more.
And I got the
and we'll
mic,
keep
so.
going, because it's only 7:30, right? We can do one more, then I'll keep going.
Okay.
So
keep
I had
going.
a question about the satellites blocking the night sky.
Yeah.
So do you think there's a possibility that there would be a point where satellites would prohibit our vision of like the stars in the night?
Oh, definitely. That's a big issue that I think we have to consider. We take for granted that right now you can look up at the night sky and see what's out there. But the more things are out there, the more our vision will be obstructed. We have to consider at what point is too many things up there. And not just right now, we take for granted that we own most things up there. There's 5,000 active satellites, almost 3,000 are American. And it's one thing to go, oh, well, that's our company doing this, and we can ask them to move this if we want to. But China's launching more and more things all the time. What if they're blocking something you want to see and you call them up and they don't listen, they don't pick up the phone? What are you going to do? So it's definitely a very important thing to consider. And as much as not just the things that are up there now is a concern, this is a great segue to things that go up do not come down the same way that we do on Earth. So out of all the thousands of objects in space, 10% are active satellites. The other 90% are pieces of space junk. We're all here right by the ocean. We can look out the ocean. Even if you can't see all the trash and pollution, it's there. We've all seen photos of turtles strangling on straws and whatnot. But in space, it's hard to imagine, but there is as much trash up in space. And as much as it's a problem on Earth, at least on Earth, our trash is not traveling 20,000 miles per hour. And when something even the size of a cherry pit is traveling that fast, it has the explosive power of a grenade. So as much as I've talked about space being really important to us, learning new technologies, printing organs and things, the more and more garbage you have up there traveling so quickly, it could very much hinder things we're doing. And not just on a defense and research level. GPS is a really vital military tool. And I think one thing that we suffer with is how advanced our science is in space and our technology is. We're more reliant on it. You know, our military has so many assets in space that we use for tracking troops and logistics, but it leaves us uniquely reliant in a way that our, you know, our competitors, our partners are not. But this is also a dramatization. I want to be clear as a researcher, this is not how it actually looks, but it's a very serious problem of how do you tackle all of that junk up there. And there's some really cool new missions trying to capture all that, but they cause their own problems. For instance, there's not really any, what's the word, comprehensive legal regime. So if I went up there and I tried to capture a satellite and I ended up messing it up, like one to try and, you know, remediate, use the term remediate old debris. Say I'm trying to get some junk out of the sky and I blow up and hurt someone else's satellite who really needs that satellite. There's no way to sue me. I might have taken down something that, you know, you might need to get to work on time, something you might need to do a financial transaction, but there's no way for any retribution to happen, which is a very serious problem. So we have this huge technological problem, but none of the policy or legal instruments to tackle it comprehensively, which is really too bad. I'd love to talk about orbital debris if you guys have any questions about that. I love space junk. It's yes. I mean, I'm sure there's stuff like way deeper out. Like there's stuff on the moon still. There's stuff, you know, it's going past that, but you know, a lot of it stays in orbit. The thing is, so something that's the lowest orbit, like where Starlink is, that will eventually, within 25 to 50 years, re-enter the atmosphere. But if you get to the higher orbits, like where GPS is, that junk will be up there for over 100,000 years. So we'll all be dead, our grandchildren will be dead, and their grandchildren will be dead, and that junk will still be up there moving hundreds of thousands of miles per hour. It's crazy. So that's why we really have to address it, because every new thing we launch can create more debris. And when that debris hits and makes more debris, it doesn't matter how tiny those pieces are. Even something as small as a paint fleck can destroy anything in space with how fast it's moving. So it really requires us to be proactive.
Rachel, I'll ask a question
Yeah.
I'll ask one question in here, but when we saw you at our weekly meeting back years and years ago,
Yeah.
you did not think that this was going to be your career path. I remember I've heard you say, I think it was on your TED talk, that you
Yeah.
build yourself as being a
Yeah,
humanities girl. So what is it about that made you change when you guys were doing your
Steve's right. We
project?
get back on track so I can hold these questions, the next question at the end. But Steve's absolutely right. I think like many of us, I never thought I could have a future in space. And it's a really sad thing that when you pull any kindergartner, I bet most of them will tell you they want to be an astronaut. I think they've done, you know, they go across the country asking kindergartners what they want to do. And if you look at it, it's about like 4 to 3% want to be astronauts, which ends up being, you know, maybe 3 to 4 million kids across the country. You know how many even apply to become astronauts? 18,000 people a year. That means almost every single kid out there gives up on ever having a relationship with space, which is truly a tragic thing because, as I've been talking about, there's hundreds of issues facing space that are going to require new and dynamic skills. And we don't have people who understand how they fit into that, which is why I'm so thankful for the Student Spaceflight Experiments Program, which is how I originally got involved in space. Joe and I designed an experiment on tin whiskers, which I won't bore you with that, but it's they're these tiny little filaments that will grow on circuitry and they can bridge components and destroy them. There was even a recall of pacemakers in the 80s over a tin whisker issue. And out of everything that can be recalled in your life, you really don't do something that's literally in your heart. So we were trying to understand how these things attach in space. And it was a really great experience. And it awoke a passion for us in space that we, you know, never even considered before. And I can say it definitely changed my life. And I think it's true for Joe as well. And I don't know if you guys have ever been to a launch, but I think that passion really culminated in that experience. I'm sure you guys can probably have an, you know, imaginary vision of what a launch is like, you know, all of these sterile people in lab coats in front of computers, but ours was a lot more like a tailgate. You know, it was just us and our teacher and all of our friends right across the river from the Antares rocket. And we were so excited for this moment in our lives. And as much as I can describe a rocket launch to y'all, I think I'll just save you the time to show you. Fine. Maybe not. Maybe I'm not going to show you. Oh, it's going. Okay. Is it not? Rip. I promise it's worth the wait. Yeah, when Steve was talking about how unlucky this event is, I could feel that on a very personal level because that is not what's supposed to happen. I promise not how it's supposed to look. But Joe and my experiment exploded on the launch pad in, what was that, 2017, 2015? And it was quite a devastating experience, but we were able to try again. And our experiment finally went up to space in April 2016 on the SpaceX 7. And it was it's really amazing what we're able to do for kids with space that we never been able to do before. There's thousands of STEM programs in space. There's one called the Tomato Spheres, where they send up little tomato seeds and they send them to kids all over the country after they've been in space for months to grow them and report on how they grow differently. There's a Story Time in Space program where, remember that photo of the mirrors or the windows overlooking space? There are astronauts every day who read storybooks to kids from that window. But programs like that, and like the Student Spaceflight Experiments program that lets kids all over the country design a unique experiment to conduct in space, changes the lives of hundreds of thousands of students across the country. And I'm so thankful for that experience. I never could have ever envisioned working in space if it hadn't been for that kind of experience. Maybe I'd love to talk about STEM and science and space. If anyone has any questions on how they can be involved, yeah.
I was just curious if you ever get an opportunity to go into space.
If I would go?
If you get an opportunity to go into space.
I have not. I think I might be good after seeing one blow up in person. But it would be really cool. And more people are going to have the opportunity to do that themselves. And I think that is so exciting. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Could you summarize that?
Yeah. So correct me if I'm wrong, but there's a lot of people active in space. How do we coordinate all of that and make sure we're not having too many things going on that we risk what we're doing? And sadly, there's no good answer to that currently. Right now, the FAA deals with launch. So if you want to throw something into space, they are in charge of that. But once it leaves the atmosphere, no one's in charge of what's happening. There's no one coordinating that. It's kind of the Wild West, which is an overused term in space, but it very much is what it is. There's no law in space, which is really too bad, because it would be nice to have a coordinating agency who's in charge of how you operate in space and can make people coordinate, but we don't have that currently. So I think we're getting closer on time. So I thought I might end with my favorite space story. I'm not sure if any of y'all heard of the Voyager mission. Sure. Yeah. So the Voyager, for those who don't know, is a really great satellite that was meant to be sent deep into space, take photos of all these different locations throughout the galaxy, throughout the solar system. And we have gotten just amazing photos of all of these places we never could have envisioned on our own. And the great thing about Voyager is by how far it's going and how fast it's going. It has already broken out of our solar system and will continue going. And it's going to outlast life on Earth just by the way that, satellites are oriented. And the scientists took that as an amazing opportunity to put, you know, a message from life on Earth to share with everybody. Sorry. I have a bad problem fidgeting. But they took that opportunity to share a slice of Earth with everyone else. Because as long life on Earth will be extinguished time, this is still traveling past us. And as much as science and space is looking outwards, it's looking inwards at ourselves. It's an exercise in self-reflection as a species. And because we knew how far Voyager was going, we made 2 golden records. Carl Sagan was in charge of this. And because they're golden, gold's a very non-corrosive metal, it will last for millennia and millennia. So again, we will all be dead, but this record will still exist. And it raises a really interesting question. If you had 90 minutes to sum up life on Earth, how would you do it? What would you share with someone for them to understand what it's like to be a person? Just think about, there's 3,000 years we've been on this planet as a species, probably more, 5,000 maybe. How would you sum all that up? Then think even broader. What about 200 million years of mammals? How do you summarize that? Or, you know, life on Earth is 3.5 billion years. Or Earth, 5 billion years. How do you sum that up in 90 minutes? I wish this wasn't a rhetorical question, because I think it'd be a fascinating exercise to see how we would all define it. But this was a really interesting question that they had to ponder. And I think I'll start by explaining what's on it, by sharing my favorite quote about Voyager. Voyager did things no one predicted, found scenes no one expected, and promises to outlive its inventors. Like a good painting or an abiding institution, it has acquired an existence of its own, a destiny beyond the grasp of its handlers. So what they put on Voyager was dozens of languages saying hello. They included drawings of people. They included the cries of babies. They actually included whale songs, which is quite progressive for their time to think of whales as deserving the space that we have. They included a mother's first words to her baby. But my favorite thing that they included was, you guys might be familiar with Carl Sagan's late wife, Andrian. At the time of this project, they were just friends, old friends. And she had just been speaking with a musical ethnographer at Columbia. They wanted to capture just the right song to capture Chinese history. And she calls him, excitedly tells him about this bizarre 5,000-year-old Chinese song. And he goes, Annie, where have you been my whole life? And they had never even kissed, never even hugged, but he proposed to her right there on the phone. I know, what a guy, right? People say romance is dead. It died with Carl Sagan. But but the next day, what she wanted to do, this was already scheduled, she had to go to an MRI machine and record her brainwaves. And her brainwaves are included on this record. And you know what she went to meditate on for 3 hours that they've put on this record? She meditated on what it's like to fall in love. So as much as this includes universal things about life on Earth, people's greetings, hellos, and whale songs, the sounds of infants, it also has something as personal as a woman falling in love. And I think that really says something very hopeful about our species, that we decided to share this with aliens. All right, that's the end of my talk. But I think we have time for questions, or let's do it.
I got to turn it on. Whoa. We got time for questions. We got lots of questions. You okay?
Yeah, let's do it. Can I have
Okay.
some water then?
Isn't, oops.
Go ahead.
Okay. Thank you, Rachel, for good presentation. Isn't having a cell tower in the sky good for humanity in terms of connecting the unconnected world?
I think it is. I think it very much is. Especially Starlink is a lot more affordable. I think if you are at the end of a Comcast line and you want to expand it even 100 meters to go to your house, the bill is like $5 million. And then there are other satellite internet services, but they're in the several thousands of dollars a month. So Starlink is able to do this for, it's not fully live, but we are imagining like $100, $200 a month, which is going to really change the game. There's so many people who don't have regular internet access, not just in our country, not just in the mountains of Kentucky or in rural Alaska, but all over the world. And having that technology is going to really be a game changer for education, and for access and for democracy worldwide. Sorry, next question. Mm-hmm. That is one of the few rules that exist in space. In 1963, we made the Outer Space Treaty. And that was made at a time where space was very different, the people involved were very different. But one of the few rules it sets out is that no one can claim, any specific point in space for themselves. So when we landed on the moon, we were not able to say this is America's moon. It's all explicitly international. That does kind of raise an interesting question, though, of we're now talking about mining on the moon or on Mars. How do you mine somewhere where you don't have exclusivity rights? Especially if that's an important thing to happen to enable people to live on Mars or in the moon, and you have no legal right to do it, it's going to make things very challenging. So that might be a regime that might have to evolve, but currently we're not able to claim things. But also, even beyond mining, there's some strategic values to occupying a certain space. For instance, if you were operating a satellite in cislunar space, you can see pretty much everything anyone's doing on Earth. But also, if you were to use the momentum of moving past and then back around the moon, you could definitely target satellites in Earth orbit. Because if you wanted to take down GPS, for instance, it would be extremely difficult to have enough missiles or enough satellites in orbit to go after it. It's like, 30 some satellites? It'd be almost impossible to do without us knowing what's happening. But if you were to slingshot around the moon, you could take out many of those satellites in one go. So there's definitely some strategic danger, risks, and opportunities to occupying a space, even if you can't own it.
We got a question back here.
Elliot, how long do you think it will take until we make like hyperdrives from Star Wars?
Ooh, what a great question. And I think probably there's some things that might be outside the bounds of what we're doing, but what we're able to do as a species. However, I do think that us being an interplanetary species is well on the horizons in the 100 to 150 year mark. But I think it's a great question, and I wish I could say tomorrow. Thank you for your question, though.
Yeah.
How did your Tin Whiskers experiment go in space?
It went well, I would say. I mean, it sadly wasn't super conclusive. I think what we did was actually kind of interesting. We took a piece of circuitry from the Space Shuttle Endeavour, which I love Endeavour, and we were counting how many tin whiskers fell off under space flight stress. And we found that many of them do, probably in the 5 to 10% range, but we didn't have a big enough sample to say something super definitive. But it went really well, and I think beyond what we learned on a concrete level, I think it inspired a passion for us in space and science that we never could have envisioned otherwise. So there's the hippy dippy answer, but on a concrete level, we could have learned more.
Will anyone else be pursuing that?
Oh yeah, so there is a whole office at NASA Goddard, which is the one in DC, that deals with tin whisker problems. And one that makes it easier on an individual level is we now know that lead is a very good mitigator of tin whiskers, and in your phone you have plenty of lead, and that keeps tin whiskers from growing. So there are people studying it, but there's some good mitigation techniques. The thing is, it's hard for space technologies. You don't want to use lead. It's very toxic and bad for astronauts on board. So it's a bit different in space, but on a personal level of what we have to be worried about, tin whiskers are pretty well addressed for now. Plus, we throw things away so frequently now. Like, how long do you keep your phone anymore? It's more of an issue in the 5-10 year mark for technology.
A quick aside before my question. I hope you know the famous joke Saturday Night Live made about how the aliens responded to the golden record.
No.
They said, send more Chuck Berry.
I love that.
But more seriously, I'd be curious to hear about your current job, both specifically or in two contexts, you in specific and your department in general. I think you said your policy recommendation.
Yeah.
So how much of that is recommending direction and how much of that is taking direction due to budgetary or political reasons?
Yeah, so my FFRDC, we exist in an advisory capacity. So we write reports and we interview people and make recommendations for the executive branch to act on or not. I will say, I think we're in a really exciting area or time and space where you see things that we talked about 30 years ago, like Space Force, finally happening. It's not just Space Force, it's, increased government and collaboration on the International Space Station, or you're having more agencies involved in funding different types of research in space. So we're finally seeing more action in a way that we didn't, 10 years ago. Do you have any other specific questions about my jobs? I love talking about my job, but there's so many different ways I could go with my answer.
I'm just curious more about how is it more giving recommendations, or is it more taking direction and figuring out how to accomplish the goals that they're putting on you?
Yeah, it's kind of both. So a lot of times we have the opportunity to recommend to them what to do, but sometimes they come to us and say, hey, this is our problem. This is what we want to achieve. How do we do it? So it's kind of a very nice thing in that sense. And I have to say to any student out there who's thinking about how to be involved in science, science policy is a really exciting area, especially if you like science, like reading about it, like learning about it, but you don't want to be in a lab all day. I decided after my first couple years of physics classes that I did not want to do math alone in a room with other nerds for 30 years. But the great thing about policy is you could take all that knowledge and that you've learned and you get to apply it to the real world to making sure other people can do the things that you want to happen. So to anyone young thinking about how to be involved in science or space, science policy is a really exciting area. Oh, there's someone behind you though. Oh, okay.
Rachel, I saw a story not too long ago about somebody that's tracking all of the space debris that you were talking about. And if I recall correctly, it seemed to be a rather ad hoc approach and even somewhat low tech. I was just wondering if you could speak to that as far as what, who is tracking that and how that's being done.
Yeah, it's a really tough area. So I kind of have to break it down by the size of the debris. So we have really large objects, like some of the debris is as big as entire rockets that we've launched and just not brought down. And that your own government tracks. Like we know how many of our rockets are just there in their entirety. Russian estimate they have. And then you have things that are smaller, maybe like toaster to car size is that spectrum. And we can see those from the ground. We have cameras that can detect that. And we have the DoD tracks that. They have a space network and they track that. And if something in that toaster to car size is close to your satellite, they will call you up and say, hey, watch out, this is coming towards you. But then everything smaller than that, everything smaller than a toaster, we don't know. NASA's Johnson Space Flight Center tries to track it, but things that are that small, you can't see. I mean, it doesn't sound that small, smaller than a toaster, but when you're up in space and there's so many things moving around, you can't really see it. We try to model it, like when something coming, let's say when so every time the space shuttle landed, they would just look at all the little impacts from debris and they would try to guess how many pieces of debris are there just from the little impacts. So the smaller it gets, the more of a guess game it is. So really what they have to do is try to beef up the protection around the satellite. But it'd be great to have more visibility in what's actually happening because again, everything's smaller than a toaster. We have guesses on where it is and maybe what we should do to protect ourselves, but we can't really tell. And if you were driving in a car and you couldn't see anything smaller than a toaster coming at you, you would be very concerned.
So I think we have 2 questions down here.
So, if another planet was come into contact by Voyager, would it take a picture of it and send it back to us?
It does all the time, which is what some of these are. And it takes so many really cool photos. It takes a long time now because it's beyond Pluto. It's way, way further. So it takes hours and hours and hours for these photos to download and they're a little grainy. But yeah, it takes photos of things all the time for us to see. Eventually, Voyager will go dark and we won't hear back from either of them anymore, which will be really sad. But for now, they're still talking to us. Yeah, it's always sad when those, when they go offline. I don't know, do you guys remember Opportunity that was on Mars? So they were able to play songs off of it to itself, like in binary. And the last song they had it play to itself was "I'll Be Seeing You" by Billie Holiday, which I don't know if you know the lyrics, but it goes, when when I look at the moon, I'll be seeing you," which makes me tear up every time I think of opportunity dying by itself on another planet. But yeah, get a nice last moment.
Thank you. Miss Rachel, what happens to germs in space, like bad viruses?
That's a great question and one that I care about a lot. So you would think nothing, right? But space has a lot of really strange conditions, one of which is cosmic radiation. And we can think of a lot of radiation that you might be more familiar with, but the cosmic radiation is a whole nother scale and it's very dangerous. And in just, right now we're only going to study this in the International Space Station. So we'll send people up for, a few months at a time. And when they come back, we find on them and on the space station, germs that normally are just common cold inducing are way more powerful after being exposed to space. And those are just things that have been in space for, a few months at a time. Wait, are you guys still recording? I have an
Absolutely are.
thing to say, but I guess if you're recording, then I will not.
I meant to say, no, we're not recording you, but we do have another question up here at this table. So
Yeah.
I think we have time for one question and we'll let you wrap it up.
So, how does the sun make stuff like disappear because it's so hot?
That's a great question. So are you asking me how the sun gives off? I think I get some help from a parent who translate this question. Oh, so the sun, this is a great question. The sun is very, very powerful and operates at a heat that we can't even imagine. Like you think of your, oven being what, like 500 degrees at maximum. We're talking millions and millions of degrees. And it has so much radiation and so much power, it can just disintegrate things. And it actually it's actually an issue that we work on at the executive office of the president level of, there are sun flares, and a sun flare that's powerful enough could take off satellites from Earth orbit. Something we actually are worried about all the time is how do we protect ourselves from the sun? Not just from sunscreen, but from, destroying our technology. So it's a really good question. And if you want to be a heliophysicist, I highly recommend it.
All right, folks. Rachel, thank you so much for that. I'm just amazed at the amount of knowledge that you have at your age about space. You swamp any of the rest of us. And we certainly thank you for making the trip down from Washington to be here. I didn't tell you all, but Rachel does have a YouTube video out that is really spectacular. If you haven't said it, it's one of these TEDx talks. I'll send that along when we get the video from this presentation, because I found it just really cool. So I'm sure you will too. So Rachel, again, thank you. Thank you all for coming. Remember, November 16th, right? Thank you all.